Hello, and welcome to Authors Die Twice, a podcast on video games and aesthetic theory hosted by two living failures. In this episode, Brian and I discuss Silent Hill F, the brand new entry in the Silent Hill series, which is, of course, now an Authors Die Twice favorite, and a game that we ended up having a lot of thoughts about. So we hope you enjoy the conversation.
Okay. So yeah, I had a thought. I guess I'll start by saying that I'm assuming I'm about halfway through Silent Hill F. I just got to the middle school part. I think I don't know, 4 hours in, something like that.
I want to
And
say finishing the middle school is about the halfway point.
okay, all right. So yeah, so maybe slightly under halfway then. But yeah, as I've been playing, I've had this thought a handful of times. I mean, of course, we spent a few episodes talking about Silent Hill 2. Um, and I think it will be worth considering, how this game is different, of course, right? I mean, especially Silent Hill 2 being kind of the classic of the series, and this now being kind of the new entry that feels I don't really ever hear anyone talking about any of the other Silent Hill games other than two. And so obviously this is partly just because this one just came out, but I feel like a lot more people are talking about this one. So maybe time will show that it's kind of a goes up there a little bit with Silent Hill 2. But anyway, I had a couple thoughts while playing. And I think like I had this feeling when playing Silent Hill 2, of course. I mean, definitely was a game that just made me feel terrible and was like really stressful to play, for a number of reasons. But uh, for some reason, that first big event of Silent Hill F, which I would say is like the fog monster, like the first time you're chased by this fog monster, um, made this feeling, I don't know, made me articulate it or want to articulate it a bit more clearly, which is that part of the horror of a game like this is not understanding necessarily what the parameters of the game are. So it's not just that there's something scary on screen, it's that you physically feel, and playing Bloodborne or playing, insofar as it's a horror game, but also insofar as it's a difficult game where you die a lot. There are those moments where you're like, oh shit, you miss a dodge or something and you get killed, and maybe there are high stakes for it, but I don't ever think I feel like physically like stressed out by that. Uh, but I think in Silent Hill, like you frequently feel like on edge, partly because not just you're represented or something's represented that's disturbing or scary, which is kind of like the baseline. I mean, the baseline enemies are horrifying and grotesque and horrible to look at, right? And kind of can be unpredictable, and so there's a lot of that. But it's also it's that I don't know what's going to happen if this thing catches me. It's that I don't know uh, what I'm supposed to be doing, I guess, right? So there's this kind of opacity to the game. And you even, I think, feel this during the early casual exploration. Like, when you're first, as with any game, when you're first starting to play, you're not really sure what the scale will be. You're not really sure how close of attention you should be paying to everything, right? Like you start off and you're exiting a house and then there are all these houses and you're not sure if you're just going to be looking at hundreds of houses or if they're going to be five houses that you explore in depth, right? I think this is something that's really interesting in games. So how closely should I look? How much time should I spend, finding items or, investigating all those little documents that you find? But when you're quite literally in fight or flight mode, something gets jammed up, I think, and you're stressed, not just because you might die, but because you don't know what'll allow you to survive. And I think this is something at the core, I guess, of a survival horror game is that you do eventually learn the metrics or the mechanics that will allow you to survive. I mean, there are plenty of items. I actually think the only thing so far that seems to have real scarcity is like weapon durability. Otherwise, there's plenty of opportunities to get your health back up. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing that maybe we could talk about. Um, but again, I'll contrast this with a game like Bloodborne, where there's a neutral kind of impersonal tone, a kind of silence, but ironically, Silent Hill doesn't have that same silence. I feel like there's less distance to it or something like that. I mean, you do really get kind of grasped by those moments that you do maybe feel a little bit more identification, I guess, is maybe where I'm arriving, with your character is what I'm thinking about. So I don't know, that's kind of a bit of a jumbled thought, but it's been on my mind as I've been playing.
Yeah, I like your thought that um when you start a game you don't know what the game is and you don't know like the you don't know how to allocate your attention or to distribute your attention. And of course games will present all of these things and sometimes what they gives you on a platter is misleading, So a game
Mhm.
might begin with what looks like a kind of open world hub or something, and it's like I mean Silent Hill does this in a way. It's like, do
Mhm.
I exactly as you say, like, do I spend my time? How much should I care about this? How much should I care about looking through these houses? For one, like, will these houses contain resources that I'll then kick myself for having missed later on?
Right.
And this is the case for most games, or for many games, but that maybe there's something particularly acute about it or particularly effective when it comes to a survival horror game. And maybe it's worth unpacking that for a moment. I wonder, for example, is it about something like resource scarcity? So are you thinking because in a survival horror game, and this is, and we should be said, like something of a revision of the classic survival horror formula. Like it's a survival horror game, but it's also a combat game in the way that Silent Hill 2 isn't, even though we're talking here about the Silent Hill 2 remake, which we covered extensively on this podcast.
Right.
Silent Hill 2 remake actually has a ton of combat in it. So I hesitate to make too much of this distinction, but you know, maybe you might say Silent Hill F has like flashier combat, or it has dodge and swing, and well, you can dodge in Silent Hill 2, but
Yeah, and there's
more
also
Souls-like combat with different
yeah.
weapons and there's combos in Silent Hill F. One thing that I discovered quite late was the satisfaction of um, stunning somebody and then switching to a more powerful weapon, like a knife or a sledgehammer, and just one-shotting them once they were stunned. Um, I'm already I'm already getting sidetracked as well, but yeah, like in a survival horror game, you actually do count resources in a way that you don't in an action game, necessarily. And I've talked before about how that's one of the great pleasures of survival horror. So as you're starting out in Silent Hill, it's like, um, should I be scrounging around? Should I actually, the game is funneling me toward one particular place, but I feel, there's a bit of anxiety of like, well,
Mhm.
will I ever get to come back here? Am I going to miss like a basic upgrade that would be very useful that I'm going to regret not having later on? But then there's a kind of another valence of this, which is like this is actually this is probably separate because it's we've talked actually about how one of the things that I love, I think we both love about survival horror games is how curated and existentially distinct they are, and that you don't have a lot of repeated rooms. I mean, you have those in Silent Hill because the houses are quite similar, but um, there's a higher degree of like just spatial uniqueness and spatial curation in the areas that you move through typically. And when that's disrupted, it's disrupted intentionally. So there will be a point later in Silent Hill 2 when you continually traverse the same hallway. And it's not like, oh, the game is just using the same assets. It's like that's actually a meaningful repetition that's happening diegetically. Um, but in many open world games, and this is not necessarily an open world game, but it does have open world elements. There is also that the way in which they're much more exciting at first because or let me take a step back here. I often find the first couple hours of an open world game are by far the best. And that's precisely because I everything feels unique and loaded with potential, and I haven't quite learned to ignore things yet. And we might ignore things because they're not functional in a gameplay sense. It's like, oh, look at all these trees. Oh, okay, the trees don't do anything, or look at all these plants. Oh, the plants don't do anything. But there's also the sense in which we don't know yet what's unique and what isn't. So the first time you see a little village, in Skyrim, you want to like linger over every single detail and look at every single building. And then when you've played 40 hours of Skyrim, you realize that like basically that same village happens like five, six, seven, eight, nine times, in the map. And it's not actually that special. Maybe it's not worth lingering over because it's just a copy paste instance of the same thatch buildings, you know. So maybe a provisional theoretical distinction here would be between in that cloud of unknowing, as it were, like in the beginning of any game, amplified here, like we don't know what's significant, but we also don't know what's unique or what's sort of designed, which is its own kind of aesthetic, but like non-ludic significance.
Right. Yeah. I mean that question you asked, will I be able to come back here or not, was is something else I have in my notes, right? This is like the feeling that keeps coming up in these games because you're funneled toward one place and you're funneled like diegetically toward one place, right? Like a door will slam shut and you can't open it again, or it's kind of interesting because again, we've talked in different ways, I think, about like scope and limitation in games. And I think, as we've said, part of the reason we love Bloodborne so much is that it's so aesthetically consistent and also so kind of contained, uh, relative to a game like Elden Ring that's much more varied. And I think there's a similar version of that, but it's maybe a little different in Silent Hill F, where, there are limitations, but even the experience that you would have in a game like Bloodborne or Dark Souls, where you pull a lever and you're not sure what it does, right? Like
Yeah.
something like this keeps happening to me in Silent Hill F, where I realize that I hear some kind of crashing noise or some sound, and I have to go, maybe slightly kind of far back to figure out that a door just opened or something just jumped through a window or, whatever, right? And so there's an interesting mix of like the UI in the game is pretty, I think, fairly inviting and intuitive, but at the same time, there's this. I mean, I think this is something we talked about a little bit with Silent Hill too, but it almost, for me, mirrors what's happening with the characters, right? Where, our protagonist, Hinako, seems kind of at once disturbed, but also unfazed, just kind of like James does in Silent Hill 2, right? He's like confused and seems to be forgetting things or like he doesn't remember anything, but at the same time, he doesn't really seem to care that he has to continuously just kill these like really disturbing monsters the whole time, right? And so there were a few funny moments that I noted after you there's like a house you investigate early in the game in Silent Hill F, and after you exit it, Hinako just says to herself, "This isn't good." And then I think it's one of the other characters, Rinko, asks at one point, "What's with all the monsters?" So, there's this kind of weird like banality to everything that's happening, even though I mean, it seems I'm assuming that we're going to get some kind of ecological description for some of what's happening because there's all this plant life and kind of organic life that seems to be taking over the town. Um, and of course, like in Silent Hill 2, but here it seems maybe a little more disturbing because we don't really have an explanation for it yet. The monsters are again these kind of like weird sexualized doll things. Um, But yeah, I mean, it's just striking to me that, one character saying "What's with all the monsters" is kind of the first time that anyone remarks that it's weird what's going on in the game, even though, they watch their friend die by becoming like a gem, basically, or whatever that was, right, that's going through her skin. Uh, and So like the normal, I don't know, I guess I'm just trying to think about how that reflects back on the player experience because there's like a normalization of what happened, right? Their threshold of integrating this incredibly disturbing shit into their like daily life seems pretty high. Like they're just like, oh, well, these nude, scarred doll monster things with knives that walk around like these really almost like stop motion marionettes are gonna try to kill me. But I'm gonna go to like the general store and meet up with my friends or whatever. Hopefully they'll be there. Um,
Yeah, that's great. And I do think it's useful to, especially while we're starting this conversation about this game, like think through some of the continuities with the Silent Hill series as we know it, which just comes from two. For me, a little bit of the original two, and then the remake.
Hmm.
Um, Partly because my understanding of the reception of this game among Silent Hill fans is that it's incredibly divisive, if not sort of hated. You know, I did a deep dive on Reddit and saw just so many Silent Hill, subreddit posters seeing sort of complaining that the game is a betrayal, that the game is not a Silent Hill game, that it really has no connection whatsoever to the series. And so
Hmm.
I saw lots of connections, and I felt, atmospherically or tonally, it was very much of a piece with Silent Hill 2.
Yeah.
Certainly visually as well. It's released only a year or so after the last one, and looks, even though it's in a different setting, has a different, um, yeah, it's in Japan in the 1960s, so different time period. It still has a very similar look graphically.
Yeah.
Um, but you just highlighted or suggested one sort of tonal or like vibe similarity that I'm going to, I would describe, and maybe this is too sort of sound bitey or something, but it's sort of like Silent Hill has this very um, uh, pointed spectrum, I guess I would describe the kind of the horror. What am I trying to say? That the horror atmosphere of Silent Hill as being one of a dialectic between the banality of horror and the horror of banality. So, or maybe it's the quotidianness of horror and the horror of the quotidian. It's precisely that way in which the characters sort of catatonically murder like legions of terrifying monsters and just seem to be having like yeah, it seemed to be like semi-conscious or still going through motions. It's like the characters believe they're still acting out their everyday lives
Right. Right.
and they register the monsters, but only partially, so that like the way the characters behave in the cutscenes is almost like they're in a different world than what we're actually playing, although they acknowledge aspects of that world. At the same time, the truest, most pointed terror and pain, and
Hmm.
trauma in Silent Hill always, in my understanding, comes from totally everyday things.
Yeah.
Like getting in a fight with your parents, or your spouse getting sick. Um, and here, like, I think just the beginning is so emblematic of Silent Hill, and that like you have like Hinako has this seeming like very intense fight with her parents over like dinner, and she just walks out the door, and then monsters are invading the town.
Yeah.
And she doesn't address the fight. We don't know what the fight is about.
Hmm.
We don't know like really anything, but they're because of the kind of the way that the game is modulating these extremes, like it raises, I want to say it like it brings the kind of creature monster horror down to the level of the dinner argument, and it raises the dinner argument like and sort of injects it with the intensity, but also the opacity of the monster horror. So that ultimately these two things end up on the same exact level, and you can shuttle between them like totally easily without any tonal dissonance whatsoever. Actually, like what's striking is the tonal harmony between those two things and the triumph of Silent Hill as I know it in my limited experience with the series. I almost want to say is precisely the way in which it maintains this kind of very level gradient or wavelength of horror, even though it's constantly shuttling between these two seemingly dissonant realms of experience.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's maybe a different way of putting it that I haven't thought of. But yeah, it's almost like a novelistic narrative plus monsters, right? And but I think also what that does, I mean, I like the idea of them being on the same level, but I also feel like you could frame it as being reversible, like, the banality, as you already did with the banality of horror and vice versa. But I also, as a player, we're kind of invited or urged to interpret, whatever the Silent Hill 2 thing is. Oh, this is James's manifestation of his guilt or, his desires or whatever, right? But actually, these are also real monsters that are, attacking him and killing him and have like specific forms and things like that, right? And I think, and the same thing is, I do think this is a total consistency with Silent Hill F, where there seems to be some kind of bullying plot. I think that the game is successful also in revealing this stuff little by little as you pick up documents or write in your journal or whatever, which is a new kind of I don't think we had a journal in Silent Hill 2, right? So we have a new kind of storytelling device there, but there's a point where a lot of the cutscenes, you're trying to catch up with Shu, who's Hineko's friend, and I think it's Rinko, who's kind of the shitty friend who keeps like trying to say like forget about her. But there's one point where Rinko says to Shu, uh, Hineko's dead. So I also don't know, like, is there gonna also be this other level of, um, maybe, which I think we kind of had a little bit of hints at that in Silent Hill 2 as well, but where this character is maybe already dead or is a ghost or something like that. But I think like ultimately the big kind of interpretive point is that and I'm always interested in moments like this. There's a total overdetermination of this one-to-one interpretation that you could do throughout the entire thing, and yet that's also not what it is, right? Like so yes, okay, Pyramid Head is some kind of weird, thing to do with punishment and, guilt and this psychosexual thing with James and Silent Hill 2, but it's also just a weird shirtless man with a giant pyramid on his head and a huge sword. And there's really no way to derive that from any kind of specific guilt, right? Especially because we're not given an origin for it, right? So there's no and same thing here, right? There's this kind of thing with the fox mask guy, and that's just become something that we have to do in the game from time to time where we go to these like weird shrine things and have to do these puzzles and the fox mask guy uh there's this uncertainty about whether we should trust him or not. There's this uncertainty about, you know, uh, whether what just happened actually just happened. But the answer is always yes, it did just happen because we're playing a game where, on the level of fiction, like even though these things are, I don't know, contradictory or whatever, they still are happening at the same level as well, right? Like so, um, I don't know. It's like it's heavily psychoanalytic, but with a big resistance of explanation, right? It almost feels, Lynchian rather than Freudian or something like that, right?
Yeah,
Whereas
that's a
in Lynch,
great distinction.
yeah, whereas in Lynch, like dreams are allowed to just exist as dreams without a map to them or something like that. And I think that's what makes this game. I mean, if the, finale of the game was going to be some kind of big reveal or big explanation, I think that would kind of spoil the game. And I think uh what makes horror really both effective and good, but also like really horrifying, is usually that it's something happening for pretty much no reason, or it's unexplained, or we don't have access to any kind of structure and logic to it.
Yeah, I would say, no spoilers, but or rather, this is kind of a spoiler for our listeners, but for you, I'm not going to give the details, but I think, I'll say I love this game. I think it's brilliant. I think it's kind of a masterpiece in its own way. Um, I will say I think it suggests too strongly, not unconditionally, or unilaterally, but does suggest too strongly a final interpretation at the end. And that feels like a big departure from Silent Hill 2, which gives plenty of hints, but always, only fills in like 40% at most of each respective, you know, um, narrative outcome or possibility. That said, there's still plenty of a very thick remainder, in Silent Hill F, like where things can't necessarily be squared one to one, or there are moments that just seem to defy explanation, and even according to the explanation that's offered at the end. I will say quickly that Pyramid Head does have a kind of origin and that James sees this picture. Well, I mean, I suppose this is like it's like a chicken and egg thing because like you see this painting inside the museum of Silent Hill, with a pyramid head like figure, but it also makes no sense because it's like James could just be fantasizing the figure. And, I think the canonical explanation is James saw that painting and he fantasized Pyramid Head. But of course, it's like an 18th century, painting or something. And it's like, well, this figure doesn't make sense in the 18th century context. Like, it's a kind of crazy monster that is now in the historical past. So, like, couldn't that just be retroactively invented by James to justify, sort
Mhm.
of to backdate this new figment that's haunting him?
Right.
So I guess I now retract my claim that but there's at least a gesture, and I think maybe that is again like telling or exemplary of Silent Hill 2 is like the way that even the seeming like this is who Pyramid Head is, this is the origin of Pyramid Head can be very seamlessly reversed into the opposite and made to be the opposite of an origin, an anti-origin,
Yeah.
but rather a retroactive projection, something that James is just inventing post hoc. But uh, but yeah, like I'm excited for you to get deeper into Silent Hill F because there are a few moments, I think of one in particular, that just feel like totally inexplicable in a really, really great way. Um, and then I'll also say, those sequences in the shrine, which I found puzzling and aesthetically the most jarring in that they feel like Sekiro. They feel like a combination of Sekiro and the DLC for Outer Wilds, which you'll understand when you play that. Um, but those sections get really good. Like the next couple ones that you do, I think are maybe my favorite things in the whole game.
Yeah, I think the last thing I did was to fight the friend who died. Uh,
Yeah.
who really, I mean, that was a really, so the game is very aesthetically consistent, but also she seemed to have this halo, which was kind of weird, right? So this is early in the game. I think it's Sakuko. Just suddenly starts having these gem-looking things like coming through her skin and she dies. And then this is when the fog attacks you. That's like the first time there's any indication that anything strange is going on in the game. And you get separated from your other friends. And then when you come back, you're in a cutscene, your character moves her into the kind of candy shop, I guess, or whatever, the general store, and puts like a blanket over her. But then you fight her and she has this bell thing, right? She has like she has like a mace and then a bell, and her big attack is to just do this like sound wave, which I found there seems to be a lot. I think this will be something for next time. There seems to be a lot going on with sound in the game, and uh I'm gonna assume that the F is, alluding to Forte, because it is like a specifically a lowercase f, and it kind of looks like the Forte symbol on a musical score. Um, but yeah, I thought that I was not expecting that moment in the shrine to be fighting like the dead friend and yeah.
Yeah. I think fans, it's that's really cool because I was, one of the first things I did after finishing the game was Google what does F stand for in Silent Hill, and because the game doesn't really explain it as far as I know,
Mhm.
maybe I missed some, and New Game Plus, there's an interesting New Game Plus mechanic where you actually there's like new areas, new weapons, and
Ooh.
new bosses and new like narrative. So like maybe as I get deeper, I've just started a new Game Plus file and haven't gotten very far. So maybe as I get deeper, they'll explain it somewhere there. But um, I do think I've seen some speculate that the F means forte, and maybe we can talk about why it might once you've finished.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but but
That would
yeah,
also
oh, go
that
ahead.
well, I just sorry, I just was gonna say that would also be an interesting like because silent and then forte, right? So there's
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
kind of yeah, amplification of silence or something like
A
that.
loud silence or a
Yeah, yeah.
forceful silence. Yeah. Which is a pretty good, feels like a pretty, you know, uh, accurate description of the tone of the games as well. I
Mhm.
will say, sound-wise, I missed the radio static. I just so equate the experience of Silent Hill with like that radio static, which you do get sometimes because there are
The
radios. And this
radios.
is like
Yeah.
so Silent Hill, it just felt so vintage. Like you go up to the radio and there's like somebody like calling for help. It's this weird, it's like a radio broadcast, or it's like again, maybe shades of some kind of domestic dispute or like this kind of horror like coming through the static of
Yeah.
something totally banal or quotidian and yet no less horrible. In fact, more horrifying because it's so real, you know. And those I loved those moments. I almost wish there were more of them because I just wanted to hear that static, man. Like that's
Yeah.
we talked about this early on, but just the kind of the combination of like pastoral um sort of setting and aesthetic with this kind of like yeah, like fuzz, you know, this like radio fuzz is just
Yeah.
so juicy, you know, and there is some of that here, but there's um a lot more of like natural beauty, you know, even than Silent Hill 2.
Yeah, and that seems to be, I mean, I think aesthetically in terms of the game having an aesthetics or even saying something about aesthetics, that seems to be part of the point of the game is that there's this kind of like beauty that is so like a fatal beauty or something like that, or a beauty that's so perfected or so, whatever that it becomes horrifying. I mean, even I don't know, I definitely won't claim to know anything about Japanese culture, but even those kind of there's the puppet sequence where you get lost in the fog and you have to do those kind of riddles where basically you have to remove this kind of thing from the correct puppet or else the puppet that you remove it from or it's actually it's scarecrows I guess but the scarecrow you remove it from will start attacking you and each one once you find the correct one it will point you in the right direction. um and those seem to be wearing those or their faces were kind of like those really pale like masks, right, that are part of uh I don't know, Japanese theater. I'm not really sure. But so and then other than that too, there's the just like really beautiful but also haunting red, foliage that starts growing everywhere. Um so yeah, I don't know, I think that's something. I mean, I'm still, only halfway through the game or only about halfway through the game, but that definitely does feel that feels a little bit of a departure from Silent Hill 2 because I don't think we really had as much of a focus on beauty, right? That much.
And then there's Hinako's sister, who is supposed to be very beautiful, but we never, at least at the point where you're at, you've never seen her face, but she seems to personify this kind of ideal of like, you know, like within the cultural context of the game and Hinako's life, like this kind of sort of ideal of feminine beauty and feminine decorum that she seems to have, yeah, very ambivalent feelings about.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean the first thing I mean, and that's interesting too because you hear repeatedly that the sister was supposed to always be there for you, but then she left and got married or something, right? And so this keeps turning up. And there's a strange illusion too where I don't know, I'm starting to like it is kind of funny. It almost I know that recently we talked a little bit about melodrama in Metal Gear Solid, but sort of the friend dynamics are starting to feel a little bit like that, right? Where there's the friend who doesn't like Hinako who is like trying to convince Shu almost like there's some kind of like romantic rivalry between them or something. But then also Shu says something about Junko, the sister, telling him to take care of Hinako. So there's all these weird like threads of relationships that I'm not sure. I guess at the point that I'm at, I'm not sure what's going to be
Yeah.
traceable or not.
Yeah, I think those develop in a good way. And I will say, just on, you know, as a simpler comment, I think Hanako is a really great protagonist.
Mhm.
And she unfolds in such, or rather, like, I want to say she unfolds, but that I really mean she, like, folds up more, you know, like, she folds up more and becomes more and more resistant and opaque. Um, and paradoxical, like, as you get deeper into the game in a really, really satisfying way.
Yeah, I have been thinking the same thing. A great protagonist. I don't know that I've ever played a game with a protagonist quite like this. There is even something that seems kind of distinct about her sort of like the monologuing that she'll do that's not in the cutscenes that feels a
Yeah.
little bit different from again, just comparing it to Silent Hill 2. Like there's something going on there that I don't think we really had with James.
Yeah.
And so even if there is a kind of amnesia or blank slate kind of cipher quality to the character. It feels more complex almost than what we got with James, but I don't know. I mean, I still haven't finished the game, so I don't know if that's gonna be borne out throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, I feel like they're both defined by this blankness, but the
Hmm.
blankness is suggesting totally different things. Like I think for
Yeah.
James, it actually just does suggest a kind of catatonia. Like he just seems like it completely emptied out,
Yeah.
you know? And for Hinako, it feels like this is a very impressionistic statement, but there's kind of an intensity of experience and feeling,
Yeah.
that's just completely unexpressed
Hmm.
in like the way, and this is a testament also to the I think to the motion capture if they used it and just the visual design in general and the graphics because like this is all just coming from like the cutscenes and the voice performance basically, but there's a real intensity to the emotional life of Hinako that it's just the fact that it's totally implicit makes it really pronounced or palpable.
Yeah, and I also think that I don't know how, canonically how old she's supposed to be, but she's not like a middle-aged guy. I think
Yeah.
there's partly that, but there is, a kind of childlike tone at certain moments that I think bolsters that kind of intensity and also like the disturbingness of what's happening, right? Like with James, okay, it makes sense that we have these weird sexual monsters, but in this game it does not, and it seems like pretty perverse.
Yeah.
And also the fact that this doll keeps showing up everywhere, right? Like there are these little hints of, um, yeah, that seem to point towards something intense or, some kind of, yeah, something more disturbing than just the typical, James, his scenario, if it can be called typical at all, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, what do you think of the monster design? I mean, you mentioned that it's quite scary, and disturbing. I do know that you're playing Lies of P right now, and I when I was playing it, I was like, oh man, this feels like Lies of P because the puppets in Lies of P have a very similar stop motion, like very unpredictable way of moving, you
Hmm.
know. Lies of P is a funny game because it's like they give you, we'll talk about this in a later episode, I think, but they give you this parry capacity that you don't have in other Souls games, and it's really, really hard to parry even basic enemies because their movements are so herky jerky, Um,
Yeah,
and that's happening a bit in you don't parry, but you counter in Silent Hill F. And I
right.
never got my head around the counters because it's just like I know you can focus and sometimes the window seems quite large, but I just couldn't read the enemies, And I think that I want to say you could say that's bad design, I think it's great design or it's at least interesting design that um after 15 hours or so, I guess maybe the game took me about 12 hours to beat the first time. Like I still had there were some enemies where I knew when they would flash red, but many of them I just had no idea and I sort of gave up trying to track it.
Yeah, one thing about Lies of P, I find what is it? The parrying system, it's fun, but the way I play it and because of the unpredictability of the enemies, I just feel like I'm tapping the parry button constantly when an enemy is getting close to me. Um, yeah, no, I think that I have the same experience so far. I mean, I think I've only played 4 or 5 hours, but the focus thing, I still don't have a total grasp on. I also know that it makes you more vulnerable to damage if you get hit while you're using focus. It also
And
depletes your,
madness.
yeah,
And,
it depletes
yeah.
your sanity. Um, but anytime it seems like I'm gonna be able to counter, I'm not close enough to the enemy to do it, which is like kind of the paradox here because the enemies are so unpredictable that w when I'm getting close to them, I'm totally being aggressive. So
Yeah.
like anytime I'm getting close enough to an enemy for there to be any contact, I'm like doing basically the way I'll play is I'll do like a strong hit and then like just keep hitting them until they die, essentially. Um, but which I think is good. I mean, I think it's good to have the combat still be unpredictable, right? It's another way that we have that, um, I guess another consistency with the larger question of, finding one's bearings in the world or, or whatever, right? Even through the gameplay itself. So I'll be curious because I also just picked up a sledgehammer, which seems kind of unfair for me to have, right? It seems like it might make the game a little bit easier, but I guess we'll see.
Those weapons are actually they're good, but they degrade and they're really, really slow.
Mm,
So my pro tip would be again, use a regular weapon and the focus strike ability. I don't know if you've tried that, but it's really, really strong.
okay.
It's where you focus until you hear like a little click, the little ring in the bottom left fills up, and then you can do a really strong attack that will stagger them instantly with R1. And then once they're staggered, then I switch to the sledgehammer and just, give them a big old pounding, and they usually die right away.
Yeah.
But those weapons they're valuable, but like you don't want to use it as a primary, and they will wear down like really quickly.
Right, right.
And again, that was the thing that unlocked the combat. So when my first 5 hours, I was just thinking, I don't like this combat. There's a lot of combat in this game, and I love the game, but the combat is not doing it for me. And it was sort of getting my head around switching weapons and using focus strike strategically,
Mhm.
uh, that I started to have fun. Um, and the game does give you some more tools as you get deeper into it, that changes up the combat in some interesting ways.
Yeah. I had actually just something came to mind that I was thinking about after it happened. I think it was a couple nights ago when I was playing. But how do you feel about the kind of jump scare that happened? So there's like an actual like whole screen visual jump scare that happens. It's at the very end of the Scarecrow puzzle when you find the final one. It like kind of turns and slowly turns to face you, and then the screen goes black, and there's this like close-up shot of this really like distorted face. I don't know if
I
you.
don't remember that.
Okay, so you'll have to watch that, and we'll have to talk about it next
Yeah,
time because there's a weird so there's a it's kind of it is like a
I'm gonna
flash
look it
jump.
up right now.
I
Uh,
found it in a full playthrough. So somebody posted a playthrough and I was able to go back and watch it again because obviously otherwise there's really no way to do it unless I
yeah,
play through the whole game. But so there's this moment where it's the final, I think it's five different cycles of that scarecrow puzzle. And the final one, you take out the pin or whatever it is to solve the puzzle and you realize that you have chosen the correct one. You get this cutscene where it slowly starts moving as they do to like usually point you in a certain direction, but it
yeah,
looks directly at the camera. And then there's the face. I don't know. The thing about jump scares is when we have something incomprehensible, right? It's not just like a
right.
mad looking face. It's something that is totally just haunting, and it looked like a face that was almost
Oh,
cratered out or like hive-like or something like this, which I really wasn't expecting and seemed in a way to break with the tone of the game for a moment.
yeah.
And then I think what Hinako says right after that is, "What just happened?"
Yeah, I
So
just
we
found
have
it on
no, like, I
YouTube.
have no clue whether that happened to her, if she saw this, or if this is something that we just get. But then when you kind of resume playing, you're back in the regular, you're no longer lost in the fields, you're back in the regular kind of town, but that scarecrow is like right behind you. So there are moments too where things will appear in the game. So I think in the school I went outside and then I came back in and now there are all these like kind of scarecrow puppets in the hallway of the school. Um, but yeah, I guess I'm just curious if you had any, I guess, any thoughts about that kind of jump scare or those, if there are other ones like that. I don't even know if that's going to happen again or.
Yeah, it's funny that I forgot that scene because it is really striking, and you're right that it's something of a departure from the way that scares work in Silent Hill. There are jump scares in that like an enemy will jump up out of the dark,
Yeah, yeah,
but not like, yeah, sort of more classic, or rather not classic, but contemporary horror device of like a freaky face that just flashes into your screen,
yeah.
that you have no, that's
Like
not even aesthetic.
those
Yeah.
you I don't know if you ever saw those YouTube videos where it'll be like I feel like I remember in high school people like would send these where it would be like optical illusion, stare at the screen for 20 seconds and then at like second 19 this like face just pops up or something like that. So that's kind of what it felt like.
Those
I
are
what
so mean. Yeah,
like I'm looking at something already disturbing. I'm like thinking, okay, is this going to be a boss fight because this thing is still moving, it's looking at me, am I going to have to
yeah.
fight it? And then instead of a fight, I get this total shock of again inconsistency too. It felt I don't know, it felt more digital too than the game would seem to. It almost feels like instead I should have been shown like an old faded photograph of something scary, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It does feel digital. I know what you mean by that. And I found it on YouTube just now, and I will say, so it was maybe 2 weeks ago that I finished this game. I just like marathoned it over like 4 days, and so my memory of parts of it is a little bit fuzzy.
Hmm.
Um, but I'll say, having looked up this moment, that I don't know if there's ever an explanation for what that is, you
Hmm.
know? So it's like almost, formally it's incongruous, and it feels like this isn't, it feels different from how Silent Hill as we know it, based on these two games so far, like, um, deploys its scares. At the same time, retroactively, I want to say it's maybe more of a piece than it initially seems, because if I'm right, which I would say take with a huge grain of salt, but if I'm right that that face doesn't come back, or that we never find out like what exactly is being shown, or even what is happening there.
Yeah.
Um, that feels, that opacity, or inexplicable ness, to coin an awkward term, uh, feels apt,
Yeah,
for the
sure.
series. And again, like, there's one moment where you're confronted with this, with like something just inexplicable, um, and as far as I know, at least in the regular game cycle, and based on how much maybe I missed a note or something, but there's a moment later on where you find something like just totally bizarre, and the game gives just like the weird thing is Hinako acknowledges it,
Hmm.
but the game gives no explanation whatsoever. I guess there's that moment in Silent Hill 2 when like you go on an elevator and then there's like a game show. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
like we never really talked about that on the pod, but like that was such a strange moment, and I don't know if I feel like James maybe will go like, "What just happened?" or says something similar, but there's no explanation, or at least transparent explanation for what's going on.
I think about that moment oddly pops into my head like once in a while because it's so strange.
Hmm.
And it almost it oddly I don't know if this is true, but like when I think about it in my head at least it reminds me of BioShock, you know, like how you're always being talked to on intercoms in BioShock.
Yeah.
Uh, and I also don't really recall what happened with it, right? So there's like it's a quiz and you're supposed to like answer the questions or whatever. And I guess does it maybe just end up being hints for a puzzle later on or something like that? Because I don't think you answer them directly. You're just supposed to remember them. Um, so yeah, it's another piece of inexplicableness that these these games has.
Yeah. And also very tonally incongruous, but not formally. So formally totally of a piece with the rest of Silent Hill 2, but
Yes, yeah,
tonally it feels like, why are we in BioShock? Why are we in this weird folksy like 1950s variety show like soundtrack all of a sudden?
right.
Um, so maybe this is the opposite. Like, aesthetically it's of a piece, but formally, or tonally it's of a piece, but formally, at least initially, it feels like a violation of a kind.
I think one final thought I guess I have that I just kind of popped into my head too. I think if unless I'm mistaken, I think we kind of talked about um how you're being addressed or how James is being addressed in Silent Hill 2. And
Hmm.
I wonder, again, I will reserve comment until I play more, but I wonder how that will compare in Silent Hill F. Like, are you slash Hinako being addressed here? And or of course you are, but in what way? I think it feels again, there are some similarities I can see, but I think it also feels pretty different. So I think I'll maybe not speculate on it until next time, but maybe that's something we can try to think about.
Do you mean addressed by the system and the interfaces, or addressed by a narrator?
Or by
Or
the world too, you know. Because
yeah,
I think, you know, it's easy or whatever or tempting to say that that Silent Hill is James's creation, or that, or that anyone who winds up in Silent Hill is just, in hell kind of replaying their traumas or guilt or whatever it is. But there's also a way in which that can't totally be true, because if it's a shared, I mean, or there's some inconsistency there, right? If it is a shared world where all these characters are playing out their own things, then that means that they can also cross paths, and that in a way seems to break with that idea that it's just for you, right? Or that total immersion in the sense that this is all James's creation, right? I don't
Right.
know. Right? So that means that other people can run into Pyramid Head, for example, right? Or get killed by Pyramid Head, or whatever it is. So I don't know. I guess it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of like a meta narrative question. But I'm wondering about how that's going to be, taking shape throughout Silent Hill F.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting philosophical question, I think, of whether, a world, can a world that you create speak to you?
Hmm.
You know, I guess like from a Freudian, like in the Freudian paradigm, the world that you create in a dream is articulate. It's saying something, but it's not communicating to you. It's like
Right.
you're communicating something, maybe,
Mhm.
or the unconscious is communicating or working through. It's not really, working through something and representing it. And maybe we see that as an act of communication, or maybe we see it as something totally different. Um, but of course, I think I've heard Silent Hill be understood as sort of representing a collective unconscious or thinking through a collective unconscious. But that's a sort of a paradoxical term in itself, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, but on this more, I like the specificity of your term address,
Mhm.
because yeah, that's really the enigma, isn't it? Can is Hinako is it possible for her to be addressed in any real way if
Mhm.
she's projecting or inventing this reality over the course of the game?
Well, and also, maybe this is a bit of a tangent, but I think obviously dreams can be a certainly a site of aesthetic experience, right? Or like I mean, how many times have you woken up from a dream and for this weird fleeting moment or whatever, and also kind of in an incommunicable way, because even if you do write it down, it's not going to have the same sort of effect, right? But dreams are so intense, uh, and part of that intensity, I think, derives from surprise, right? So if it is in fact you, or if unconscious is part of you, uh, then it is, if it is you kind of addressing yourself, you're still kind of doing it in this mediated way that ends up surprising you. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think, not to be too hasty about applying that to everything. I mean, I think that horror also does obviously, hinge on surprise to quite a large degree, right? I mean, it's when we see something we don't expect, and not only don't expect to see it there, but don't expect it to exist, right? So this is maybe like again, that horror and wonder sort of combination, or back and forth, or dark wonder, I think, as we said at one point on a different episode. And I just, yeah, I mean, part of what I like about this game is how that's happening at, a number of different levels. So like we kind of already talked about, right? There's a jump scare where an enemy jumps off a building and lands near you or whatever, and that's okay, that's like a horror trope. Then there's also the jump scare that seems to pierce through the era that the game is supposed to be set in, and instead reminds me of like a YouTube video that some asshole sent to me or whatever, that scared me. Uh, and I'm sure there are other like narrative surprises. And I mean, I'm kind of, maybe this is one more final seed to plant too, but I think also that part of what's really, I think in when we were discussing Silent Hill 2, I think part of what was in my mind, and I think we kind of talked about, is this kind of lingering horror. So there's like the jump scare is the thing that gets you scared. And I mean, even today we started by talking about those moments where are actually like your heart might be racing from a video game, which like doesn't happen to me all that often, but will happen in a game like this because you're actually thrust into this really stressful moment, right? It's not just a stress about whether your character is going to die, because that doesn't matter, right? I'm just going to start again, and I don't even have to go back to my save point. It's just going to start me at that combat interaction or whatever. Um, but there's a lingering horror that is something else, right? Or that comes from something else. And I think, it's in the hinting that happens, and also it's in the specific language that happens. So I do think Silent Hill has a strange poetry to it, like the way when you find documents or even when you're doing the puzzles that kind of have these poetic fragments that are just truly, yeah, bizarre, seem kind of insane, but they seem kind of insane because they're so particular and so like intentionally worded, you know?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of those, again, the scarecrow puzzle, like each time there's a hint, but the hint is this weird little kind of almost like a little poem,
Mhm.
that seems really sinister and
But also quotidian, like about it seems like
yeah,
it could be written by like a
it's
high
like a
school.
bullying thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, it has the core of that like really dark thing, which is, I mean, maybe this is a kind of a banal point, but what is going to be disturbing is going to be just the really, I mean, in psychoanalysis too, even, right? Like when you uncover something, it's through speech. So it's always going to be through the particular way that something is said rather than the narrative that's been built intentionally behind it. So it's in these kind of, and I think you can kind of feel that happening when that happens in the game, right? Somebody says something and it's not in the cutscenes where people are saying stuff that, they can kind of go back and forth. It's in these accidental, surprising moments where you find a fragment of speech that feels so revealing, even though it's kind of covering something up at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems like a great place maybe to end. And lots to follow up on next time we cover this game. But a couple things did trigger that you said did trigger something, a memory in me, actually a memory from 2 nights ago. So this is on the topic of dreams as a kind of aesthetic experience, but also of like a kind of pure incongruity that's just really, really upsetting. And I'm reminded of Shane mentioned this in Elden Ring actually, that he one time he found, which, jumping back 6 months or whatever that was, I now know what he was talking about because on the record I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. But he mentioned that he saw this like flat blue glowing entity, that felt like so visually incongruous with the world of Elden Ring that it like really upset him.
Mm.
And this all reminded me that I actually had a horrible nightmare 2 nights ago. And so let me, if I can, let me just give a very brief description of this dream because it's in fact about Elden Ring,
Mm.
which shows how brain rotted I am, I
Yeah.
guess. I had a dream that began, Freud says a dream is the fulfillment of a wish, and I suppose my wish was that there would be another Elden Ring DLC because I had a dream that they released a new Elden Ring DLC and it was incredibly vivid. It was so real. I was playing it. Um, and the DLC begins in what looks like an Italian hilltop village, like in Tuscany. And it's sort of there's like this giant that's like striding through the hills, and you have to avoid the giant and make your way into a church. And so I was like, huh, that's interesting. Like they're really borrowing from, Renaissance like aesthetic. They're moving forward in time. They're not just doing the medieval dark fantasy anymore, but this still feels it feels right. It was kind of eerie. It felt too modern, even though we're talking about like a medieval or whatever, 16th century Italian village and not a 12th century, Italian village. But um, getting to the church, exploring the cathedral, it felt like that cathedral in Dark Souls 3. I was like, okay, this feels interesting. This is new. But then the next area of the DLC was in like a Greek party island. So like, like Mykonos or something where you're in like the present day So you're walking through this town. It was very Silent Hill actually, like a kind of abandoned town, but the town had like cafes, and it had restaurants and it had like um streetlights, and just like the pure act of playing Elden Ring, like just regular Elden Ring, like no modifications, but in a street that had restaurants was so viscerally upsetting and disturbing to me that I was like shaking. And then there was this further section in this party town where you are traversing a parking lot, which feels totally Silent Hill 2. So like an industrial parking lot and you're like fighting enemies. I was like rolling with circle and hitting using R1 to attack, but it was like with my sword, but it was in like this modern parking lot in on an island in Greece at night. That was a key thing. It was sort of at like the violet hour of like the sky was just like this vivid purple, but it was like the latest point of evening basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Um and there was something infectious about that vibe. Like who wouldn't want to be in Mykonos at the Violet Hour? But in this case, the conjunction of that with Elden Ring gameplay felt like the most it felt it felt profane and felt perverted, you know? And I woke up like in a cold sweat, like I was so disturbed and shaken by this dream that felt so real, that I had to just like go on my phone for like an hour and just kind of scroll through shit and like just kind of recalibrate my relationship to reality. Um, and so, Brian, when you wake up from a terrible nightmare, just remember, keep your magic lantern backlit.
Okay, or I'm gonna counter that by saying that you could keep your evil warding lantern lit in Silent Hill F.
Exactly. Nice.
All right.
Uh, See you, Brian.
See ya.